Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to learn what it means to be a good listener and how it has almost nothing to do with these so-called listening skills. Often, when we learn how to listen better, all we learn are new skills. Do this, ask these kinds of questions, use these kind of, micro gestures, micro skills to let people know that you're listening so they're more likely to talk with you. And I think that maybe these can be helpful, but ultimately, listening comes down to really being a good listener, like just genuinely, authentically a good listener. It comes down to something a little bit more fundamental than learning to do one thing as opposed to another. But I think some of these skills can still be helpful, especially if they can get you at that more fundamental part of listening, which we'll talk about. So just a few of these skills. I have 5 here. One that I find really helpful that I definitely learned in graduate school, I think you learn in any psychology program, is to reflect back what somebody has said. In a sense, if somebody tells you something, you narrate back what you heard. And this is a great way not only to get them to clarify their position, not for you, but in their own mind, but it helps them to know that you actually want to listen. And when somebody, a lot of people, you know what I always say, you go 10 years of your life without even talking to somebody, a lot of people go a long time, they don't talk to somebody because they don't think anybody cares. If you just narrate back what you heard that they said, they're going to offer more information, right? Not just for your clarification, more importantly, for their clarification. That's how this really matters. Another thing you can do is, this almost sounds simple, but ask questions. Just ask basic, especially clarification questions. A lot of people, they get uncomfortable about asking clarification questions because, maybe that means I'm not listening or I don't understand. Yeah, by you telling them that you don't understand, could you please clarify that? What do you mean by this? What are you even talking about? It shows that you're listening and it shows that you do care. And a lot of times when people are talking about something a little bit sensitive, emotional, that they're not going to make any sense. They're going to go around in circles. And they kind of know that they're going around in circles. They kind of know they're not making any sense. So it's a huge breath of fresh air when you ask them, what do you even mean by that? Come on. I know you're smarter than that. Tell me what you mean. And and go back to the original point, it shows that you are interested. Another listening skill is, sometimes, this happens with intellectual guys. And I'm definitely guilty of that, of doing this, is instead of understanding where somebody's coming from, we try to explain. Like we understand, in a sense, where they're coming from. So instead of communicating that we understand, we explain and go, well, this is happening and this is happening. And it's not as bad as giving advice. Giving advice is such a terrible listening skill. It's not even on here of something not to do. That's obvious. Don't give advice. Okay, that's 2A. So now on to 3. But don't explain. Don't explain, and you follow my stuff, you've read my book, you've watched these videos, you probably have a pretty good understanding of psychology, at least compared to most people. You could probably explain where somebody's coming from, but that's not really helpful. It's way more helpful to understand. And a great thing that I say, just a simple 3-phrase word usage that I employ, is simply saying, that makes sense. It makes sense that you would do that given that situation. If A, B, and C happened, then D, E, and F are going to happen. It makes sense. I get it. I see where you're coming from. You're not approving necessarily. That doesn't mean you approve of what they did, but it makes sense. Yes. Where you're coming from, especially emotionally, that makes sense. The 4th thing is, oftentimes when somebody's talking about, especially a sensitive issue, when listening is the most important, they are talking about a time in life that was either difficult for them, very painful, very difficult, or just they were overcome with joy on either end of the spectrum. So it's good to have a few experiences that from your own life where you can relate to being very difficult or being overcome with joy. I know I talked about this in my videos on narcissism. What a lot of people think they need to do is, if somebody talks about an experience, they think they need to tell their own experience about that thing. Like, somebody went on a hot air balloon. I need to talk about that one time I went on a hot air balloon. That's not what you do at all, that indicates narcissism, let alone not a good listener. But just have a few experiences in your back pocket of times when that are really difficult for you. Not that you bring up these experiences necessarily when somebody's talking about an experience that they're going through that, let's say, it's difficult. You don't have to bring up your experience, but just have that in the back of your mind of, relating to somebody emotionally, right? We'll get into it with how to listen to somebody at a fundamental level. You got to be there with them emotionally. That's what people are communicating when we're using the words are just a vehicle for the emotions. You got to relate with the emotion. So if somebody has a tough emotional experience, you got to be relating with that tough emotional experience. You don't have to bring up your experience. You can. I would say do it in a very brief way, just to say, yeah, I get what you're going through. A, B, and C happened. Or I know that feeling. This is where that feeling came up in my life. Whether it's this feeling of being stuck or just being in a place of a lot of joy. And I know I worked with a lot of alcoholics and drug addicts before, and I'm not an alcoholic or drug addict, but there are times in my life where I just felt stuck doing something. And a great way that I just relate with those guys, or I did relate with those guys, is just being sick. Having a cold, having a flu. I mean, we often call addiction a disease or a sickness. It's not literally that, but it can be helpful to think about it in that way, and it can be helpful. I get it. So a great way that I related was like, yeah, I've had a cold, and just the frustration and not being able to do anything, and then you take, right, you saw something that to relieve the symptoms. And some fever reducer, which does relieve the symptoms and does make you feel better for a little bit, some anti-decongestion, but it doesn't really attack the root of the problem. What do you do to get to the root of the problem? I just lie in bed, drink liquids, and relax. And eventually it takes care of itself. That's how I always related with addicts and alcoholics. Same thing emotionally going on. And then it almost seems silly to bring that up now, but I really just clicked with those guys when I thought about it in terms of just me having a head cold. And then the fifth way to really listen, or the fifth thing to really do, is to relate on an emotional level. And this is what we've been building to. I mean, the big picture here is that listening isn't going to come from doing one thing or another. It's not going to come from asking us certain questions or, doing one of those things that really bad therapists do. Yeah, I see. It's not going to come from that. It's going to come from you getting in touch with your emotions. With you becoming clear about who you are, with you having some kind of transparency with your own emotional life, with your own unconscious. That's where being a good listener is going to come from. And once you do that, I don't care the skills you use. You can use any skill. You can use these skills that I talk about here or not. It almost doesn't matter. But this comes from you understanding, making sense out of, reflecting back your own experience first. Understanding emotions. Understanding how they work, in a sense, managing your own baggage. Now, up until now, I would argue managing your own baggage, we can't really communicate that too clearly. We can't get too specific about what that means, but that's what we do here at Animus. How to manage your own baggage, how to manage your own unconscious, how it is affecting you outside your awareness, and not talk about it in vague terms, but get really specific. Get unbelievably specific about what is going on, what emotions are. Number one, how they work, how you talk through an emotion, how to talk about it in a way so you can process it. And by process, I mean make that which is unconscious more conscious. See how it's affecting you. See how it's coming up in different patterns of your life. That is exactly what we do here at Animus. We do free consultations. animusempire.com/schedule. Thank you. I'll leave it there. Like and subscribe. Tell one friend. And always remember that when you want to get good at listening, the person who you really have to listen to is yourself.